Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Parisa Noble, and I'm excited for our first guest of the show today, which is Amy Cooper from a technology provider called Craft. And Craft provides supply chain solutions that are, I'd call them non-traditional supply chain management types of solutions. It's not your typical supply chain management technology. It's meant to augment supply chain and ERP types of technologies with other data points and information to better manage your supply chain and anticipate some of the challenges that we were just talking about in the first segment here. So with that all being said, Amy, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I'm far from an expert, Eric, but I'll try to answer some questions and share what we're hearing in the space and with different customers all around the world.
Great. Well, I'm guessing you're more of an expert than 99% of us on the live stream here today. So it's all relative. People all over the world here. And so I think this is supply chain management is something that is a universal global topic. And maybe before we jump into some of the questions that I have for you, and certainly audience, if you have questions, please drop it in the chat. I'm watching all the platforms here. While Amy's talking, I'll be kind of scrolling around between LinkedIn and YouTube and Crowdcast just to keep an eye on what people are asking. But in the meantime, before we get to those questions, Amy, just maybe talk a little bit about your background. How did you get into supply chain management? And then I'm going to ask you about Craft here in a second too.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny. So I'm in enterprise sales at Craft, and I, like many people who wound up in sales, was graduating college. I had no idea where I was going to go, what I was going to do, and I was just taking interviews everywhere. And so after a series of interviews, I landed at Dun & Bradstreet selling risk, supply chain, and sales and marketing solutions to enterprise customers there. And almost immediately, I really gravitated toward the supply chain use case. I think, there were a few reasons for that, but at the time, D&B was just releasing their supplier evaluation risk scores. So it was really hot in the marketplace. Everyone was really excited to have a score around supply chain, not just a credit score. And so I really gravitated toward that because of, the new scores and things, but also the conversations that I was having with customers. Every single business was completely different. It was just fascinating to me how the same department, if you will, could be so vastly different. And so it was just really exciting and fun to be able to be having these different conversations. And so I was there for just about 6 years. Was then recruited by a former manager to join a company called Info Group, which is now Data Axle. And so they are a marketing database company. And so I was intrigued by that because, it was still B2B, but then there was a big B2C component. And I hadn't done B2C data. I hadn't done marketing database solutions. And so that was an exciting challenge for me, and I loved it. But in the back of my mind, I kind of missed that supply chain discussion. And so when Gartner was launching their supply chain business, I joined them. And I worked there for a few years, helping, essentially I was focusing on pharma, healthcare, retail, and media and entertainment, bringing in the Gartner executive partners and helping solve some real supply chain challenges. And I absolutely loved that role. And then I had kids. And so I took a little bit of time off while my children were babies. And last summer, a former colleague of mine who is now running sales here at Craft reached out to me and just said, you've got to come see what we're doing here. This is just incredible in terms of, really disrupting the data supply chain, the way organizations consume data, but also how they leverage that data to manage supplier risk and be proactive instead of reactive. And so I've been here since January, and even just in these 6 months, the changes, it has been really, really astronomical and exciting. And we're solving some really great challenges for our customers. And so it's a pleasure to be here and be back in the supply chain world.
Yeah, you kind of feel like that's where you belong, huh?
Yeah, it's funny. I try and have these conversations with my family and my friends, and they just don't get it. So this is so fun for me to be able to have these chats with you guys and hear questions coming in from the audience. So it's great.
Great. Well, before we get to those questions, maybe that's helpful to hear a little bit about your journey and how you ended up where you are now. Tell us a little bit about Craft. What is the solution? What does it do? How does it fit into supply chain management?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the simplest level, so Craft is an enterprise intelligence company, and what we're doing is aggregating both traditional and alternative data sources. And from a supply chain perspective, what does that mean? We're helping our customers build a resilient supply chain and use leading indicators of risk to proactively mitigate it. So traditionally, risk has been something that there was very siloed data sources, and I know we'll get into this a little bit more down the road, but Craft's data is allowing our customers to really look at alternative data points that are leading indicators of things going on, and really helping them excel at all stages of the supplier lifecycle, whether that be discovery, evaluation, or ongoing monitoring. And so, so we are working with global organizations, a large chunk of the Fortune 500, the Department of Defense. We have clients all over the world, and we're really driving real results from, leveraging best-in-class data and technology to make better decisions and then to reduce the time to that decision.
Right. Great. Yeah, that's a very timely, it seems like a very timely product. You guys are riding an interesting wave right now where that seems to be much needed in the space.
It's funny you say that. So when the company was founded 6 years ago, it's kind of a funny story. So our CEO and founder was working in VC at the time, and he had, I think the number is something like 12 or 14 different tabs open on his computer researching a business. And he had this light bulb moment. He was like, this is madness. Like, why in this day and age, with the technology the way it is, and with data the way it is, why can I not just go to one place and get everything at once? And so that was kind of the light bulb of like, I'm going to build kind of like a Zillow of business information. I'm everything in one place. And so we set out to build this company, and so they build this intelligence platform capable of, gathering vast amounts of diverse data from different sources and bringing it into one easy to use interface. And at that time, they didn't quite know where it was going to fit, right? It could go to sales and marketing. It could go to credit and finance. It could go to market intelligence. It could go to mergers and acquisitions. There's a lot of different places within an organization this data can fit. And very quickly, this supply chain use case started percolating up because of all of the disruptions that were happening and the need to better understand your suppliers. And so about 2 years ago, the Department of Defense came to Craft and said, we've been using your data. Now we want to integrate it into our systems. And so that was kind of the launch point from which we've said, okay, we're going to take this time right now because supply chain is so critical, and we have something that no one else is doing to support these customers within supply chain. We're going to focus on that. So our data team who's sourcing new data partners, our product team who's continuing to evolve the product based on customer feedback, we're really focused on supply chain. Although we do have many customers that use us for market intelligence or sales and marketing or merger, M&A activity research and stuff like that.
That's great. So I guess, in this experience you have leading up to and including your time here at Craft and what you're seeing in the market, what are some of the ways that you've seen global supply chains evolve in more recent years?
That's a great question. How much time do we have? So I will preface the answer to that and say a lot of this, I think, has been percolating for some time. There were indicators that these things were going to be changing. And then I think once COVID hit, it turned these like little brush fires into a raging wildfire. And it really forced customers to start to reevaluate how they're going to manage their supply chain. I think one of the biggest changes over the last few years is supply chain now has a seat at the table with the CEO. And I think for a long time, supply chain was just there. The business knew it was important. It was a foundation, but it got products from A to B and it manufactured and things were sold and stored, but it was working and they were making money. And there wasn't a huge need to include the supply chain teams in the strategy sessions and the long-term planning. And so now that's changed. I think in the past 18 months, businesses have really started to see how critical the supply chain is and understand what supply chain risk means. And so now the supply chain and procurement executives are being brought to the table to really dig into the business and make a plan for how do we handle this down the road? What are we going to do next time something like this happens?
Yeah.
So that's the first. I think the second way there's been a big shift is in the sense of for a long time, supply chains had a process and a strategy that was very lean, and it was based on demand forecasts, and they bought materials based on what they were going to produce, and the warehousing space was only what they were going to need. And they only produced enough product for what was for the consumer demand. And the margins were very, very thin, and it was good, or excuse me, margins were big, and and everything worked, and there wasn't a lot of room for error. And so what COVID has exposed really is that, yes, while there can be great planning, great demand and forecasting, and you can try and manage it, you really need to have a backup plan, and you need to understand, you need to be watching your suppliers. You need to know what's changing, when it changes, right? You can't find out a month later. You need to know the day of or the next day that something big has happened. You need to be prepared and have a contingency plan. So, it's funny. One of the clients that we're speaking to is they're a big pharma company, and they have, they've made the decision that they're not willing to take the risk. And so they're actually, they're stocking 3 years of inventory and 3 years of materials because they don't want to risk in not being able to get something they need to make one of their critical products. Another aerospace and defense client of ours has decided they're going to start, they've implemented a new policy where they have all of their key suppliers within 12 hours of their manufacturing sites, because they don't want to risk not being able to get the product. And so I think businesses now are willing to spend a little bit more money for that resiliency, to be able to have that plan in place so that they're not caught in a situation like we've seen with the personal equipment and some of the other things we've seen, toilet paper, all of these things, when the forecast doesn't line up, companies are being caught. And so they're being smarter, and they're spending some more money to be able to manage that. I think, I have to mention diversity and sustainability as a huge, huge initiative right now. Every single customer we are talking to has massive diversity and sustainability goals. And it's kind of two-pronged. It's for themselves as a company to be an inclusive and valuable, member of the business community, and to be able to create those inclusive places for their own employees. But also within the supply chain perspective, they are asking their suppliers to report these things. They have initiatives where they want to spend money with diverse suppliers. I know during COVID, one of our customers was actually supporting some of their small, diverse suppliers because they knew that they were not going to be able to make it through the pandemic without the help of these large organizations. So diversity and sustainability is huge right now. As a cybersecurity, I mean, we all saw the news this week about Colonial Pipeline. Tracking cybersecurity of yourself and your suppliers is something that can't be ignored anymore. There's been kind of whispers about it in the news for the past few years of like, the U.S.'s cyber infrastructure is at risk, and we have to be careful. But now these cyber criminals are targeting the supply chain. I think attacks were up 42% in Q1 of this year, so it's not going away, and it's the attacks are just getting more complex. So really, understanding where those vulnerabilities lie within your supply base. And tracking that and understanding it and having a contingency plan if something happens, like we saw this week.
Yeah. It's interesting how when supply chain management really started to take off or get traction, like in the 90s, when global supply chains started to proliferate, when you start talking about outsourcing and contract manufacturing in other parts of the world and whatnot, at least for US based companies. It seemed like a lot of the focus was on cost. How do we drive cost efficiencies and drive down our total, the cost of our supply chain? But now you have so much more to worry about. It's not just cost. You've got, you mentioned the reliability of your supply chain, the sustainability, the diversity, all that stuff now. You have to kind of balance and prioritize, what's most important to you as an organization.
And you bring up a great point, because really what it comes down to is, as an organization, building out what are your priorities and what is your risk threshold, right? Different organizations, some might just say, you know what, we're going to continue with the lean strategy, and if we get hit, we get hit. We're seeing a lot of customers adjust that strategy to be a little bit more resilient. But the key is really just for each organization to figure out what that threshold is for them. And then let's put a plan in place to make sure we're giving you the data that you need to be able to execute on that plan, and make sure that we're keeping you up to date on things changing there, so that you're not caught off guard, and you're able to be proactive and make adjustments and pivot before the disruption occurs.
Yeah. And anticipating what could disrupt the supply chain. And what are some examples? I know, Craft as a company and the solution itself really, part of what it does, from what I understand, is track and predict where there could be problems, whether it's weather related or geopolitical, or I don't know if it could predict pandemics or not, or what sort of impact a pandemic would have. Anyone could predict that. But how does that work, or how does the solution in general help accomplish some of those things and some of those balancing that a lot of organizations are trying to do with their supply chains?
Yeah. So, there's three big differentiators with Craft, right, versus what's out there in the marketplace. So the first is the depth and the accuracy of our data. So we are collecting over 350 data points on a company. So everything from traditional sources like financials and firmographic information and their operations. What do they do? What do they sell? What do they manufacture? But then we're bringing in a lot of additional data sources, things like cybersecurity scores, diversity certification data, human capital, employee sentiment, website visits, social media engagement, things like sustainability scores, data breaches, all of these things, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is give our customers a 360-degree holistic view of a company. And so then how does that help them manage their risk? There's a lot of these different alternative sources that traditionally haven't been leveraged as an indicator of risk, but we know they are. So for instance, if within an organization, if there's consistent turnover at the executive levels, that's an indicator that there's something going on. If you're evaluating an up and coming startup or a new smaller business that you think is really taking off, and you think you want to do business with them, if you look at their website visits, the traffic should be trending higher. If they're doing really well and they're doing what they're saying they're doing, that trend line should be going up. If it's not, are they really gaining that much traction in the marketplace? Things around, the cybersecurity scores we have. If someone has a score of an F, they have a 7.7x, 7.7x times, probability of a data breach, right? So when we're talking about data breaches, you want to understand within my supply chain, particularly in businesses where there's sensitive consumer data, credit cards, social security numbers, you want to make sure that your suppliers are secure, because if they're breached, it can then flow to you depending on how that attack has been orchestrated. And so the tool the Craft offering is really bringing all of these data points together in one place. And then we highlight where we see potential risk on a dashboard, whether it's by cybersecurity or ESG or those things can be customized depending on the client. But so we're highlighting where we see risk, and then we're giving real-time alerts to changes within the data on companies that our customers have chosen to track. And so through those two components, and then having it all in one place where the entire organization is able to look at that same data set, right? So what we hear from a lot of customers is they just have this data and platform fatigue. They're sick of logging into 20 different systems to get information, and then it's inconsistent information, and then there's different people pulling the information, and it's just this inefficient mess of data, and then no one really has the answers they're looking for. So what we're doing at Craft is we're consolidating everything into one place and giving our customers the information that they need to make these decisions around risk, and then reducing their time to a decision and time to action.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because I think most of the time when you analyze a supply chain historically, and when I say we, I mean I, my team, other consultants in the space, when we've analyzed supply chains, typically you're looking at the flow of goods, you're looking at the cost structure, you're looking at lead times and things like that. And that's all important stuff, but you're sort of getting into the guts of the organization, and you're sort of peeling back the onion to get to the root cause of what could cause risk, with financial instability or marketplace, market share loss, or unhappy employees, things like that that don't show up in a flow chart showing what your supply chain is doing. Yeah. Super interesting.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
That's exactly it. So if you think about supply chain management, right? I mean, that's a huge term, and there are dozens of different pieces of technology and software that fit into that. So logistics and planning and forecasting and analytics and spend management and shipping and invoice processing, and I could go on. And all of that is critical to the infrastructure of the supply chain organization and how you move goods from A to B and how you run your business. So where Craft sits is really at the foundation of that pyramid, right? We are that data foundation. And, we are focused on building that best-in-class database. So many of our customers will say, this is fantastic. I could really use this type of data. Would you mind, would you go out and get it? And because of the size of Craft and the economies of scale and all of the customers and businesses that we do touch, we are able to go out and source that at a much at a much better rate than what our customers could do if they went out to buy it themselves. And so we've really become this repository. So, we partnered with D&B. So if you have a D&B subscription, you can pull that data in. So you can view it all together in one spot with the Craft data. We also have a very easy to use API. So we do have many customers that bring our data into their system. So into their, SAP and Oracle and Ariba and the different tools that they're using. And then they run their analytics based on our data through that tool. So we're very flexible in how we engage with our customers. Really what we want to do, though, is be that foundational layer of data so that you understand who these businesses are and you understand when they change. From a discovery perspective, what we hear a lot of the time is it's hard to find new diverse suppliers, for instance. All these businesses have these huge diversity spend goals, and they can't get to who makes this little glass vial that's a diverse supplier. And so we're offering that up very easily within a few clicks. You can see, within the United States, here's glass vial manufacturers that have a diverse certification, and then you can go out and continue your due diligence. So, there's also something to be said for objective third-party information. From a traditional standpoint, how risk management has been done within supply chain has generally been, at onboarding a supplier comes in, the company will pull a D&B report, they'll get the supplier survey, the supplier will send in some information, and then they'll file it away. And in 18 or 24 months, they bring it back in and they recertify and they do it all again. The problem with that is we know just from analytics and past experience that these suppliers are getting hundreds of these surveys all the time. So they're rushing through it. They're just trying to get it off their desk. They're also painting themselves in a better light, right? Is someone going to tell you like, "Ooh, I don't really have the capability to do this order"? They're just good. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. Right. So what we're starting to see is customers using our scores to reduce the number of that type of work they have to do. So depending on the scores, they have business rules around when they're going to send the surveys, when they're going to recertify, and then they use our monitoring so they know if there's anything major changing. So it's changing the workflow away from a lot of this manual work to leveraging data and technology that's available today to make these teams more efficient and to help them get to an answer quicker. We always say that we reduce your time to a decision. Like we want to empower our customers and enable them to reduce that time so that then they can move on to being, thought leaders within their organization and really changing things and moving on to other things that are important to them rather than spending 4 hours researching a business. Like do that in 10 minutes with Craft and then move on,
Right. Yeah. Do your real job. Day-to-day.
Yeah. I mean, we work with one, it's a top 3 telecom, and it's not in our contract that we can say their name, but they did an audit before and after Craft. They have 40 analysts. And before Craft, it took them like 3.5 hours to put together the profile that they had to put together for their auditing purposes. After Craft, they do it in 7 minutes. So across 40 people, that time savings, it's enormous. And it seems so simple, but it's really making a big impact. So we're really, really proud of what we're doing and the data team and the product team and how we're building it out to really enable our customers to really drive some huge results.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's such a different technology too, and just a different way of looking at supply chains. And, from our perspective at Third Stage, most of our work with technology providers is sort of your traditional ERP providers, and then also your traditional supply chain management providers, the standalone, best of breed, the Arivas of the world, or I may have an associate's, whatever it may be. But
Right.
I guess, my perspective is that a lot of those systems are focused on automation, some data transparency, and just general workflow, but not getting to the things you're talking about as far as,
Yeah.
getting underneath, the surface of what's going on with your supply chain and where the risks are. But how have you seen, in general, how have you seen technology impact supply chain management in recent years? You mentioned, SAP, Oracle, Ariba,
Yeah.
obviously Kraft now is a provider in a different way. But in general, what are some of those trends you're seeing technologically with supply chains?
Yeah, I think you just kind of mentioned it, is the technology, the AI and the ML and the integration technology is really soaring right now. And these systems are now talking to each other. Whereas I think 10 years ago, these systems were in place, but there was a lot of human intervention, like taking the next step in the workflow. Whereas now everything is talking to each other. So, the item is placed on the ship, and then there's a signal that goes back to the system, and then the ship departs and it gets to where it's going. And once that item is unloaded, there's a signal back to the system, and then the payment is released, or the invoice is set and the payment released, and then we can start this cycle all over again. So, where in the past, all of these things required some person to touch it, now it's just automated. So it's much quicker. It's much more efficient. And, so I think that's the big key. I think there is, almost every day, it feels like there's new technologies popping up, Kraft being one of them. So there's a lot of people recognizing some gaps in the space and bringing to market some really exciting things to help fill those. I think, I think even little things like real-time alerts, like that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. To be able to tell a customer in real time something has changed within your supply base, you need to address it, So I think technology has really enabled supply chain to be more efficient. And I think it will continue to evolve as more supply organizations adopt technologies. I think for a long time, everyone was kind of going with the flow. What had been done forever was working and it was fine. And now with, all the disruption of the past 18 months, organizations are saying, hey, how can we be smarter? How can we be more proactive? How can we understand everything? What we're hearing a lot is, the end tier analysis, right? So a lot of businesses are really good at understanding their tier one suppliers, but when you start opening that up and peeling back the onion down layers 2, 3, and 4, I mean, it's almost overwhelming when you think of it from that perspective, how much risk you could have if this one tiny little widget provider, all the way up the chain could disrupt these global businesses. It becomes a little overwhelming when you think about it that way. But the technology that's in place today is really allowing businesses to understand that and get a grasp on it. And then back to kind of what we were speaking to earlier, put a plan in place based on the thresholds that business is comfortable with, and then execute on that plan pretty seamlessly.
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of organizations were so focused on using technology to achieve that efficiency that you're talking about, but they didn't necessarily use it as a way to highlight risk or to identify reliability issues, or better yet, how is our supply chain potentially impacting our customer experience? And I think that's what a lot of companies seem to be struggling with right now, post pandemic or the last year plus, is now all of a sudden we have disruptions to our supply chain. We can't tell customers when we're going to give them product. So now it's not just an efficiency issue, it's a reliability issue, it's a customer experience issue. And it just seems like it sort of spreads throughout the organization and throughout the customer base as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I was reading, there was a recent IBM study, and they came out and they interviewed, I forget exactly how many people they interviewed, but they interviewed executives at a bunch of companies, and 60% said that they expected to be disrupted this year by a competitor because of their supply chain organization. Not a new product, not a new app or not a new delivery method, not better marketing, the way their supply chain managed manage the business across the board. So this is something that's top of mind for everyone. We are integrating into some of those technology partners that you shared for that reason, to be able to not only allow the businesses to have that tactical level view of all the steps of the supply chain, but then to click over to another tab or to bring in some of these supplier details into their analytics to get a sense of, okay, if I'm looking at on-time delivery and I'm looking at risk and I'm looking at, sustainability, let's run some analytics and understand, hey, who are our suppliers who are actually rock stars, and let's give them more business because this is matching our sustainability goals and they're on time. They're doing all these things. And then where do we need to focus and maybe give some support to some of our suppliers that aren't hitting those targets? And so it's allowing, having the additional third-party data is allowing our customers to run the analytics and to just get to that next level of data and detail to be able to manage their supply chain in a way that's more effective and more innovative than what's been done in the past. It's just, and that's where the technology is helping. We couldn't do this stuff 15 years ago. And so you see organizations getting really excited about these changes for that reason.
Yeah. And it's really getting to the sort of the proactive supplier scorecard types of measures. So instead of looking at the traditional supply chain scorecard or supplier scorecard measures like on-time delivery and quality, any sort of quality issues, those are more after the fact. So you can rate, you can rate a supplier after they've already screwed something up. But what you're talking about is identifying or anticipating where you could have a supplier in a situation where they might screw up. Not that you're necessarily going to change that supplier, but at least you can know about it and make adjustments or hedge your bets if you need to.
Knowledge is power, right? So the more information you have, the better. And whether that means you drive them more business, whether that means you realize, hey, there's a hidden risk here that I'm not sure about, and we need to start onboarding some alternatives here because there's a potential that something might go south. Regardless of where it fits, having the information to understand more about these businesses is always going to be helpful.
Right. So we have a question on Crowdcast, or actually it's a comment that I'm going to convert to a question. But the comment is, craft services seem well aligned with supply chain maturity development. And I guess maybe a follow-up question just to build on that general comment, and I agree with that comment, is that the technology you guys provide seems to elevate the maturity of supply chains. But how would you, just based on the customers you work with or the prospects you talk to, prior to them using your technology, how would you assess the general maturity levels and competency levels of organizational supply chains? If you had to give it a rating or something, or how would you describe where most companies are?
Gosh, that's so hard to answer. Let me think about that.
Is it all over the board?
So, it is. And I have, so funny example. So, I can't name company names, but so I cover primarily healthcare, pharmaceutical, media and entertainment, and retail. And so I'm working with two different pharmaceutical companies. So one is stocking 3 years of inventory and has a 30-page risk program in place already, and they are buttoned up to the T. One of their main competitors, who I'm also working with, is just hired someone a year ago to build a third-party risk solution. And they're in the process of understanding what that's going to look like. How does that fit into their business? And so the answer is that it's really all over the place. I think there are a lot of times when we're having conversations, customers, when we first make a phone call or when we first meet someone, people say, oh, we're doing that. We're doing risk management, or we're doing monitoring, we're doing alerting, all these things. But then when you dig in and peel back the onion and figure out what's really being done, it's in very, very basic, simple stuff. And that's why businesses are getting caught, because they're doing what's always been done and not leveraging new technology, new data. I mean, there's so much information out there on businesses that is just getting ignored, but for the most part. And so really what we're trying to change is bringing in these different sources and these different indicators that are leading to an answer that you're trying to get to. People just haven't been using it. So, we do have, we see a lot where clients and prospects will want to test our data against another company or test our alerts against another company. And we're winning, and we're displacing a lot of the really big names in the industry because the data and the accuracy and the relevance of our alerts. We actually have a team of people curating them. So I know I say alerts and a lot of customers go, no, I have too many alerts. I don't need any more, because they're signed up on Google Alerts and they get the same article 6 times because no one's managing that. So at Craft, we're really focused on curating the alerts to make sure that when our clients get something from us, it's really, really valuable and relevant. And we worked, one customer did a test of us against another alert provider in the industry. And over the 3-month test, I think we delivered 156 alerts, and they said 86% were critical to have for our business. And so, again, we're really focused on not just throwing the sink at our customers. We're really trying to curate an innovative, new way of managing suppliers, the supplier data foundation of all of your systems, and their risk and their ongoing changes. And we just started 6 years ago. We're a venture-backed startup, but we're really making big waves in the industry, and we're excited about it because people see the product and they go, oh my God, like, where has this been? And we're like, here it is. It's here now. So we're excited.
Yeah, it's very cool.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
That was actually the question I was going to lead into is speaking of humans and technology and the intersection of the two. When you have new information like what you're talking about, you're providing sort of a new data set, a different way of thinking about supply chain, reliability, sustainability, all these different dimensions that you're talking about. What are some of the challenges that you see from the human side of it? Because there's one thing to present people with the data and present them with the tools, but how do you get them to fully bake this way of thinking into the way they manage the supply chains?
Yeah, it's always a challenge when you change the way things have been done, right? So I think I alluded to this earlier. I mean, previously, there was due diligence on the front end with very specialized data providers, right? Someone with a credit score, someone with a cyber score, someone with this. And then there were the steps, and then it was filed away. And then a year, 18 months or 2 years, it was looked at again. So I think from the perspective of challenges kind of changing the way things have been done, I think really the results speak for themselves. So we do a lot of POCs, let's work together for 3 months. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And what generally happens is, our team is great at training and at helping our customers really understand which data points are these leading indicators of something to pay attention to. And generally, these results come, and either we send an alert and it saves them money, or like the wireless example I gave you, from 4 hours down to 7 minutes. I mean, you can't, once the results come, all of a sudden it becomes a very different conversation about not only, okay, how can we implement this long term, but who else in the organization can use this? So we frequently start in these like small POCs, and then it just continues to grow because there's many parts of an organization that can get this kind of data and that can use this kind of information. So, it's the beginning. It's kind of like changing an existing process that's been in place for a long time. But I think people also realize that what was being done before wasn't working. In the past 18 months, we've seen that, right? So everyone's kind of open to these changes and trying new things and modifying the workflow to maybe be a little bit more efficient and manage things a little bit more proactively. And then again, moving on to other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. And it's always good when you have people that recognize the need for change. And it sounds like, in many supply chains, people do recognize it. It's just a matter of how do you get them to adjust to this new way of thinking and thinking about the supply chains a little bit more, multidimensionally or holistically, whatever you want to call it, than they may have in the past.
Yeah.
So here's a couple of really good questions just came in on Crowdcast. Yeah. A couple that might be opening a whole can of worms that we could spend a whole hour on each of these questions. But the best one I think is from Balakrishnu Alu. And he asks, how could the auto industry avoided the chip shortage? And that's a great, relevant, timely topic. I don't know if you have any theories about how to save the world, and in particular the chip shortage in the auto industry.
Kraft isn't paying me enough. I can solve it today, right?
Right.
No, so the chip shortage. Okay, so this is interesting, and this kind of goes back to the challenges around planning your supply chain just around demand forecasting, right? So we take a step back and understand what happened with the supply shortage. So these factories in China were closed in the early days of COVID, right? When COVID hit China and the manufacturing plants closed down, that was kind of the first drop, right? So once that was back online, and COVID came over to the States and spread globally, demand for these products skyrocketed. Families were buying multiple tablets or computers for homeschool. They were buying gaming stations. They were doing home upgrades, and refrigerators now have these chips in it. I mean, these chips are in everything from tablets to kids' gaming stations to refrigerators to cars to they're everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so initially, when the factory shut down, that caused a shortage. The demand spiked. So that really was kind of the first layer of challenge. And then what happened was, and this is back to the lean strategy, a lot of these companies forecasted that demand was going to drop because they thought people are going to be scared, they're not going to buy. So they didn't place the orders. The facilities didn't manufacture. Demand continued to skyrocket, and now we're stuck. And there's just not enough. There's not enough to go around, and they're trying to get back up to speed, but demand keeps rising, and it's this back and forth. And so, I think it was. I read an article. I think it was Toyota is actually not having a chip shortage because they said, we're going to just keep them. We're going to buy more now because we're not quite sure that this demand is going to drop. And so they're actually okay. And so you see it with, President Biden's executive order trying to bring some of that manufacturing on shore. I think it's, and don't quote me on this, but I think Taiwan Semiconductor is planning like a $35 billion facility in Arizona, but that's not going to be here for a while, right? So how do we manage right now? It's just going to take some time. The reality is that the forecasts were wrong, the demand planners were wrong. And because of the shutdowns with COVID and people that were sick and couldn't work and productivity down, it was just kind of the perfect storm, but it really highlighted the problem with this lean manufacturing process. And I think that's part of why, businesses are readjusting and changing that. Yeah.
And your response right there, and actually this whole discussion is sort of a good reminder of how increasingly important and integrated supply chains are becoming with the rest of an organization, because now with this issue with semiconductors, that's not necessarily just a chain or a supply chain management issue. It's also a demand forecasting issue. So you think about, was it really the supply, was the supply chain the problem, or was it the demand forecasting, and people assumed that demand was going to drop, and so therefore the supply chain, adjusted accordingly. So, and you also mentioned before, like the employee sentiment. So then you're starting to get into human capital management, and now suddenly human capital management, supply chain management, those are kind of coming together as well. So I think supply chain management is really broadening, and sort of the tentacles of it are kind of broadening throughout an entire organization in many ways.
Yeah. I work with a big furniture retailer, and they cannot get good talent. They can't hire in their manufacturing facilities here in the States. And there's all of these, you hear about unemployment and all of these things, but where their manufacturing facilities are, there's competitors manufacturing in the same place, and they just can't drive. So they're using the tool to say, how can I attract this top talent? So they're using it to research things like job openings and where these other companies are hiring, and salary numbers that we're pulling into the tool, to be able to then adjust their own job offerings to be able to attract that talent, because they can't get enough people in the factory. So it's supply chain now. I mean, obviously I like talking about it, and this is, I built my career around supply chain and risk and data, and but it's finally getting the credit and the visibility that it deserves. I think for a long time, like I said earlier, it was kind of just the status quo, and everyone expected it to run smoothly, and it had for so long that people kind of forgot that, hey, there could be a ripple here that then turns into a big tidal wave. And that's what's happened with COVID. And I think moving forward in the future, we're going to continue to see these workflows shifting and technology shifting, to make everyone better. Supply chains, businesses, make things better for the consumer. It's just, I think it was something that had to happen. It was this perfect storm with COVID and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And somewhat of a related question that is also very interesting is, unfortunately, I can't see who asked this question for some reason. It doesn't show the user or the person that asked this, but it's a great question. The question is, emerging technologies are changing our available resources, meaning our suppliers are changing how they produce the raw materials we need. For instance, the steel we need is also needed by electric cars, and that cuts into our available raw materials. Would Craft simply point us to another supplier? And so in other words, how do you navigate that issue, or how do you anticipate that problem that you have with the demand, even if your own demand for a certain product isn't increasing, but others are now competing for the same limited raw materials? How do you anticipate that, or is there a way to anticipate that?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we're actually actively evaluating now is bringing in commodity data and alerting customers to changes within commodity availability and pricing, because we're hearing this a lot. So I had a conversation yesterday, and their big issue is they're anticipating a big aluminum shortage coming up. So all of their packaging and all of their product development is moving away from tin and aluminum, because they're expecting to not be able to have enough fairly soon. So that is something we're actively looking at. We're looking at providers to see if anyone meets what our customers are asking for from that perspective. I think so today we would help you find another supplier is really the easiest answer to that. We would be sending you alerts on those particular suppliers that were struggling within those sectors, and there would likely be other indicators highlighting that there were some things going on, whether that be visits dropped, hiring dropped, executive changes, cyber and ESG scores going haywire. We calculate the Z-score and a lot of other ratios within our finances section. So that's where that would go. And that's a big challenge for a lot of companies is, lumber right now, businesses can't get pallets. I mean, something that we've taken for granted for so long with the lumber shortage. It's just really highlighting things that we never thought we would care about, and it's popping up left and right. So we are actively looking for a data source to be able to answer that question in greater detail. But for now, it would be around keeping you up to date on changes within those existing companies, and then finding others that do the same thing.
Yeah. Gets back to that whole point of vendor diversification and geographic diversification, based on the vendor themselves, or maybe the material they're supplying, or whatever the case may be. So it's good stuff. So we have time for one more question. I appreciate all the great questions, and I definitely appreciate your time, Amy. But one more question that came in that's probably a good place to maybe tie this all together and wrap this up is, what impact do you think geopolitics will have on global supply chain management, and how do companies go about mitigating disruption and environmental climate change disruptions? So that sort of gets to that sustainability thing that you were talking about earlier as well.
Yeah, God, that's a great question. Let me unpack that, because there's a few. There's a lot there. Let me just read through that so I make sure I'm answering it properly. So like I said earlier, every single company that we're working with is talking about diversity and sustainability. So, and that there's multiple lenses to look at sustainability. Let's just focus on that for the purposes of this question. So there's things like, water consumption, usage, carbon emissions, all of those things. And a lot of those data points, it can actually just be found online. If you do enough research, they're publicly available. So there's looking at that. And then there's looking at details and scores in comparison to other businesses that are similar to that. Industry, location. So there's a lot of different layers to sustainability. And each company we're working with is a different program in place. So some of our customers are asking their suppliers to then initiate some sustainability programs within themselves. Sometimes it's going down to tiers 3 and 4, where they're requiring certain sustainability requirements be met in order to move forward. In the case of U.S. government contracts, there are requirements in place in order to bid on a contract. You have to have certain sustainability metrics to be able to sell to the government. So there's a lot of different layers to that question. I think making sure that you have good information, that you're comparing that to industry and geolocation, right? So depending on the industry of the company and where they're located, the possibilities for sustainability and environmental governance and all of these things are going to be different. So a manufacturing site in India has a very different footprint than a manufacturing site in the south of France. And so it's about understanding where they fall within that ecosystem, but then also understanding the nuances of that location and the rules in that country and their own programs. So it's very, very complicated. I think, like I said, it's top of mind for every company we're working with. And I think organizations are still trying to figure it out, because there's even another angle of, young consumers now who really care about the environment are demanding this of these companies. They're using their dollars to shop at companies like Rothy's and Allbirds. It's all sustainable and recycled shoes. And so they're taking off because businesses care. There's a home goods company called The Citizenry. And so they source their goods and they manufacture their goods in local villages all around the world. And it's very small, but then it provides a source of income in places that otherwise wouldn't necessarily have that ability. And younger consumers are flocking to these businesses. So there's that whole other angle of how do we incorporate these just from a brand standpoint. And so there's just, I think that diversity, sustainability is going to be kind of the future buzzwords within, it already is, but it's going to continue to be the big buzzwords within supply chain organizations, trying to figure out how do they leverage that to make themselves a better company, but then also to make them attractive to the consumers that now really care about that.
Yeah.
Did I answer that question? I'm sorry. There's a lot in that question.
Yeah, no, I think you did. I guess it's up to Raymond whether or not he thinks he answered it. I thought it was a good response. But it is interesting. I hadn't thought a lot about the the climate change, sustainability. That is obviously an emerging area, and companies organizations in general are sort of issuing their own self-imposed mandates in many cases on how they want to improve their climate footprint, and obviously supply chain management has a big impact on that as well.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll ask you one last. I know I said that would be the last one, but this is actually probably
okay. We had a little break in between with our technical issues, so
yeah,
we can go over a little bit.
And now we're getting some more questions, but this is probably actually a good capstone sort of question, which is, and it sort of ties into some of the other questions I asked earlier around supply chain management technologies in general. But the question is from Amin Kafal, and he asks, can craft solutions help companies where a big part of their supply chain management is still managed primarily manually, basically help a company with no solid or almost obsolete business applications in place, ERP, for example, and where most of the workflows are managed using sheets. So if you have a very manual supply chain, can Craft help with that? Or is it sort of like Craft plus a supply chain management or ERP type of solution?
No, yes, reach out. Absolutely. We can absolutely help with that. We have customers across the world, and from very sophisticated, global orchestrated organizations down to, smaller companies that, to your point, don't have a sophisticated technology landscape in place, and they need a place to start, and we do everything in between. So anyone can reach out to me directly at amy@craft.co or on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. Like I said, I love to have these conversations. If anyone just wants to learn more about Craft or just supply chain, what we're seeing, happy to speak to anyone that has. Thanks. There you go. Happy to speak to anyone that has any more questions or would like to learn more about Craft.
I appreciate you being here, Amy. This is a great conversation. I know we could probably spend another hour easily on this stuff, but this is a good overview. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, happy to, and happy to chat again if it makes sense. If everyone's asking for more supply chain stuff, like I said, I love talking about it, and the landscape is changing daily, so it's really fun. So, thanks for having me, and nice talking with you.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that great discussion, Amy. Very insightful, good information for us as we think about our supply chains now and in the future, and pretty eye-opening too in a lot of ways. It gives us some different ways of thinking about supply chains and being a little bit more proactive in how we manage supply chains and supply chain management. So when we come back from a break, we're going to talk a little bit more about supply chain, and then we're going to shift gears and talk about enterprise asset management. We're going to have another guest on the show, Wayne Holtham from Third Stage Consulting, Asia Pacific. He'll be on to talk about all things enterprise asset management. We'll be back with all of that right after a quick break on Transformation Ground Control.